Hi, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are watching this from. My name's Lee Seymour. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Xref. I'm here having a nice cup of tea with the guys from RapidID. We've got David Haines and Hoey with us today. And following on from our recent series discussing video interviewing, discussing digital onboarding, we thought it'd be a really good idea to ask RapidID their thoughts about ID verification, considering that the whole of the recruitment industry got sent home a little while ago, and we're all learning how we can recruit effectively from home. And part of that is how do we actually validate whether the candidates are in fact who they say they are. So thanks for joining me this afternoon, Dave and Ash. Lovely to catch up and ask you some sticky questions. So look, to get straight into it, pre-COVID, without all of the chaos and uncertainty that we've seen since the beginning of March, what trends were you seeing in ID verification, in the ID verification pre-COVID?
The trends pre-COVID were probably still heavily geared towards a lot of traditional industries relying on 100 point of ID verification, meaning someone bringing in literally 100 points of ID in person to have somebody cite that documentation. With the events of COVID, the use of digital and online technology now is where we're seeing a lot of the uptake from companies that haven't had those systems in place beforehand.
Dave?
Yeah, we were seeing a shift away from certainly a traditional approach, but a shift towards what's often referred to as a layered approach to ID verification. So that is to say that not one method is good enough in isolation. And if you want to verify somebody's ID, it's not enough just to get documents, or it's not enough just to do a biometric measure of some kind. You need to couple the two. And sometimes there's 3 or 4 different levels and layers of ID verification that you need to adopt into your business to be sure that somebody is who they say they are. So we started to see that trend. And I've no doubt that COVID-19 has now expedited that journey to everybody adopting a multi-layered approach.
RapidID, the core business, serves online banking or online betting or environments where consumers have to prove their ID to be able to use a certain service or product. Do you think recruitment is late on in the game? Do you think that it should have been here quicker and maybe take ID checking a bit more serious? What with the global movement of talent, do you think the industry is late in the game?
The industry is late in the game. Yeah, I'd agree with you there, Lee. It's funny, there's certain industries that you think are crying out for the adoption of ID verification, but the candidates resist it. And then in other industries where you think perhaps it's not so important, candidates are more than happy to engage in some sort of check. Example I always use is your phone. Apple brought out fingerprints technology to access your phone, which is biometrics. And then they brought out facial recognition to open and unlock your phone. Everybody, by and large, everybody was okay with it. We stare at our phones, it unlocks, and then we do some arbitrary task that isn't too important in our day. It might be texting a mate. But then there's something far more important, like employing somebody into your business. And I'm not necessarily talking your big 4 banks, big 4 consultancy firms. Let's talk about small private businesses where it could be a family business who is for the first time inviting a stranger into the organization. More than ever, I think at that point, you need to make sure you know who you're bringing in. But it's at that point that a candidate might respond negatively, I think, to let's say asking for their biometrics or asking for too much ID. And it seems strange. It seems strange that it's that way around. I think candidates need to start to acknowledge that when you take on a new job, You are entering somebody else's organization. There's a history to that organization. There's a trust that exists in that organization. And then there's an owner of that business who's dipping into his or her pocket to give you money. And why wouldn't they want to make sure you are who you say you are? So yeah, recruitment and HR is a little slow on the uptake, but that will change. And it will change along the traditional lines that we see in other technology. Fintech tends to lead the way. You've got huge sums of money trading, and so naturally technology and innovation tends to start in that industry first and trickle down, and HR and recruitment tends to be a little slower on the uptake. And I think it's no different for IDV. It's happened already in fintech. It's going to happen in the HR and recruitment world, and we were just starting to see it before COVID.
Yeah, sure. And do you think, you know, Dave has had a career in recruitment and you know, within the HR industry, Ash, but you know, you came across the Xref business and we sort of knocked on your door and said, hey, you know, I think our industry could benefit from online ID checks, whereas you had always been around, you know, the sort of online banking and telco and betting and those kinds of environments. Did you think we were mad when we said recruitment should be checking IDs?
No, absolutely not. I think you guys were absolute trailblazers. Not enough people probably take that part of an onboarding process seriously. The biggest risk to any business, say if something goes wrong, is knowing where you want to point the finger or look for any recourse. Because if you don't know who your customer is, there's no way that you can kind of question that person if something was to go wrong. And it's no different in HR. You know, if you're bringing on someone in your business, typically if I was thinking about someone looking to purchase or rent a property from a homeowner, you know, your home is your most valuable asset in most cases. The second most valuable asset, if you're a business owner, might be the business itself. So would you let in someone to your home that you don't know? Are you really willing to risk it for your business as well? So ID verification to a high standard in any HR candidate screening sense is I think crucial for the future.
I think the knee jerk has been that, you know, online verification of identity adds value to recruitment, but there are sectors that you should be doing it, especially if the person's driving a vehicle or the person is traveling or the person is subject to, you know, an element of trust. Are there industries that have adopted it, ID verification more so than others within recruitment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it probably mirrors what Xref have experienced, Lee. So I can think of probably three that we've seen a significant uptake. First, and I've mentioned it, is fintech. Any industry where you're transacting thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, you need to know who you're transacting with. Two reasons. Number one is common sense too, because there's a lot of money at stake. But the other reason, of course, is regulated. There are regulators out there who are saying, if you're a financial organization and you're transacting, you are under anti-money laundering obligations, you're under counter-terrorism funding obligations. So that industry is obviously a no-brainer, and people would expect ID verification to be big there. But outside of that, we've seen healthcare. It mirrors what Xref experience. If you are being put into a position of trust, it only makes sense that you're going to be assessed or scrutinized that little bit more carefully before you jump into an organization. So if I had an elderly relative in a care home, I'd want to know that the people who are going in there to care for them are who they say they are. Unfortunately, we don't live in this ideal world where, you know, everybody enters these environments with only the best intentions. So we need that safety net. So healthcare and care in general is a big one. And then I'd say, and Ash has got a history of this with RapidID before Xref came along. That sharing economy is huge. So the obvious ones are, you know, your ride sharing apps. Yeah. Well publicized, so I won't go over it, but yeah. You know, there's plenty of stories of why we need to know who these drivers are.
Well, we've had horror stories, right? Not just ride sharing, but food delivery and apartment sharing, and there's
Yeah, and
yeah.
once you prove a business model of sharing a car or sharing an apartment, you ultimately prove a business model for sharing anything of high value. And so the RapidID business, we work with, I think, caravan sharing apps, lifestyle sharing apps. So we've got people who want to share jet skis and all kinds of weird and wonderful contraptions. But anywhere where you're taking your pride and joy, you're giving it to a stranger. Naturally, you want to do your due diligence and not just trust your gut, but have something a little bit more robust to say, should the worst happen, I know who that person is, and I can go get them if they ride off into my sunset, literally on my jet ski.
On Ash's bike. I was actually
on Ash's bike. Yeah.
Lifestyle share Ash's bike. So government, not for profit, support workers, volunteer workers, health workers, that they're all top of the agenda as we navigate COVID right now. But just thinking about how recruitment is probably doing it when, pre-COVID, I know, for years we used to have a candidate come to the office, photocopy their ID, stick it in a file, tick a box, and move on, and probably not even check it, and just hold it, right? So when a recruitment company is looking for an ID verification system, and they're comparing it to how they're doing it, taking a photocopy, putting it in a file, what should they be looking for in terms of a solution? Are they still able to do that? Can they hold driver's licenses and passports?
They need to scrutinize the existing process before they look at any alternative. So long before you even look at a digital process, pick holes in your existing process. And everybody's different. Everybody does it differently. But one of the things we've seen change recently is how we handle people's sensitive personal data. So it was more than acceptable years ago to scan an ID, keep it on file, and for a recruiter to look at that ID and go, yeah, that looks like that person. This ID looks legitimate. I'm going to take a copy of it. I'm going to store it in a filing cabinet, or hopefully more recently in a file somewhere. It was fine. The last few years have seen changes. Not just a shift in mentality, but an actual shift in legislation as well. So in Europe, we've got GDPR, which has a global impact. Shortly after, we saw the new privacy laws in California updated to reflect something similar to what we see in Europe. I dare say the Privacy Act here in Australia and in New Zealand will start to mirror changes in GDPR too. We have to be very, very careful about what we're doing with people's sensitive data. And if your process is to take a copy of someone's passport or driver's license and then hold it on file indefinitely, you are putting your organization at a little bit of danger, because what happens in 5 or 6 or 7 years' time when that candidate comes back to your organizations and questions why you've got a copy of their passport on file?
Yeah.
It just raises too many questions, and long gone are the days where you don't need a legitimate reason to hold data on file. So look at your existing process and then question where the holes are, and only then can you look at a new solution that's perhaps a digital solution and look at that as a viable alternative.
Yeah.
In terms of how we move on from here, I think with so many recruiters working out how to be effective recruiters from home, and how to give the candidate a similar journey, a similar path into their organizations, how do you think COVID is going to change the way people check these IDs and verify candidates on the way in?
Rewind the clock 9 months, and we were probably telling people that their process is a little out of date, and their process of gathering and checking ID needs addressing. And we were questioning whether a recruiter, or anyone for that matter, was qualified to take somebody's ID, look at a human being and go, yeah, that's that person, that ID looks fine, and making a call on it. Humans make mistakes. And whilst you have a human process, you are prone to making those errors, and that needs changing. If a human being looks at somebody and looks at an ID, we've been conditioned to look for certain things. So when we look at a person's face and we look at an ID picture, immediately when we're looking for whether or not they resemble this photo, we're going to look at hair, weight, skin tone, and these types of things. So if somebody comes in and they've dyed their hair pink.
Judging me now, Dave.
Yeah. If they've dyed their hair pink, if they've shaved their head, if they've gained a load of weight or lost a load of weight, and their license looks nothing like them anymore, a human being will say that doesn't resemble that person, and they might question it. Technology doesn't look at any of those things. Technology hasn't been conditioned into what's perceived as attractive or eye-catching. It looks at measurements. So technology will look at the distance between my eyes, the distance from my forehead to my brow, or my philtrum, or the width of my nose, and it will give me scores. And only then will it determine whether a person looks like their license. So you remove all of that human interpretation of the data, and you look at the biometrics that don't change. So it doesn't matter if I plan to put on a load of weight over winter, and I will. It doesn't matter, because my biometrics won't change at all. My facial biometrics won't change, and I'll still match that ID. But a human being isn't qualified to make that call, nor is a human being qualified to say whether that driver's license is legitimate or not, or whether it's come off a market stall, in China, or whether it's legit. So you take that out of the equation, and you try to put in a digital process. And 9 months ago, we were banging this drum and saying to people, look, this isn't the way to do it. And since COVID, organizations have come back to us and said, well, we need an interim solution. We need a better way of doing this in the short term whilst we can't meet candidates. And now they're happy to adopt technology. But it isn't for the reasons we initially told them to. It's because their hand has been forced, because they can't meet people anymore. They can't cite that ID. So only now are they trusting technology. But what's been refreshing that Ash and I have noticed is people coming back to us and saying, well, actually, now I'm using it, now I'm used to the technology, I'm starting to see why this is better than the human process we had in the first place. I'm starting to see why it's better that we don't store sensitive data on file, why it's better that your machine learning algorithms determine whether this New South Wales driver's license looks like a legitimate New South Wales driving license. And I'm starting to understand why it's crazy for us to trust an untrained eye on making a call as to whether or not this person is this person on this license. So whilst the initial reasons people came over to use a tool like RapidID were COVID related, the net result has been an increase in the comfort factor around using biometrics, using a digital platform to do ID checks.
It wasn't so long ago that the English licenses didn't even have a photo on.
Correct. Yeah.
And you had no chance as a recruiter to check those. It would take you weeks to check whether that ID was legitimate or not.
I don't know if you've had an international driving license recently either. The document is actually within a paper card, and it's a piece of cardboard that's actually given to you, and that's an international driving license that's issued by the authorities within each country, and Australia in particular. There's let's say it's very hackable would be the easy way to describe it. A piece of cardboard's not something that you can rely on. So taking the process to a digital format creates a whole bunch of other issues, but the process and the old methodologies do need to be updated.
In Australia, most people carry a driving license in their pocket, but as a recruiter, what do you think people should be asking for, a passport or a driving license?
Look, I've got a response to that, and I think the driver's license and a Medicare card are typically the most sought after documents, because they're two that typically are in someone's wallet. But technology's evolving and changing all the time. I think that we will get to a point where your face will, as Dave so eloquently put it before, You know, we've been trained as consumers to be unlocking devices with our face. You know, no PIN. You know, it's nothing sensitive they have to write down or somebody could get access to later. None of this knowledge-based or authentication. You know, there's so many websites you'll sign up to, and companies that ask for secret questions. You know, what street did you grow up on? What's your mother's maiden name? Now, it's all good if my password gets hacked, because I can change that, but I can't change the street that I grew up on. I can't change my mother's maiden name. Those are things that you can't change. And if somebody gets a hold of that and companies don't change their processes, you're going to be at risk going through an environment like that. So I think moving towards a digital mobile verification process, our face is going to be a tool that we're going to look at in the future very, very seriously.
Yeah, it's an evolution from access levels being determined by something we know and something we have. So something we know being mother's maiden name, something we have, a passport that we choose, through to something that you are. And that's that kind of final bastion of security. Using something that you are to gain access to something is far more secure.
Yeah, really interesting. So what about, you check an ID at the start of hiring someone. Who is doing, or are there any sectors that are doing continuous checking through the life of, or the career of that person within that organization?
We've got a very broad discussion around, you know, what constitutes as ID. Is it a document? Is it your you know, digital footprint? Is it my physical presence? You know, terms like KYC, AML, CTF get thrown around all the time. What we want to address is somebody's proven ID that we've verified to a standard of proof. Is that the same ID that they carry with them throughout, you know, whatever service that they're using, or job? I think there are industries, particularly in banking, that do have ongoing monitoring type situations where they are, by legislation, forced to continually screen and update and make sure that the information that they have on somebody is up to date and accurate. Whereas there are other industries that have just got no processes around this and really probably don't have any idea who that person is when going into a process.
You and I, Lee, used to always say about criminal police checks. You know, they don't tell you whether a person's a criminal or not. They just tell you if they've been caught. You know, how good a criminal they are. And so there is a need to shift your checks to ongoing checks, because taking something as a snapshot in time isn't necessarily good enough. So, I mean, RapidID offers things like politically exposed people's checks, adverse media checks, and we can offer these on an ongoing basis because people's situation changes. So you need to adopt technology that can check on an ongoing basis. So it's important to look at those checks that will assess things continuously. But also it's nice to be able to use something like biometrics to continuously unlock a device and an ongoing, something that carries with you. So, you know, if you submit your facial biometrics to an iPhone, you'll use that same data to unlock a series of applications within your iPhone as you open different apps. And that's kind of a way that you do ongoing checking. You can submit something once, but then hold it and on a database and use that repeatedly to continue to unlock a number of services. The beauty of biometrics is you can't ascertain somebody's identity from using a bunch of facial measures. You know, if I take a password, if I take credentials like mother's maiden name, if I take your name, date of birth and address, I'm going to ascertain who you are. But if I take measurements around a face and somebody hacks that data, it's useless. So on an ongoing basis, using biometrics as a way to access data, apps, is a good way of doing it.
Really interesting. Really enjoyed the chat, guys. I've learned something this afternoon. Finally, and you know, I like to always end these things on a nice high note. During COVID, naming no client names, but have you got any positive stories that have come out? You know,
I mean, there's a number, but it seems apt to pick something that's directly related to COVID and to pick something that's care related, because that's taken quite rightly a central focus in the public consciousness at the moment. We were speaking to an organisation the other day that provides a range of care services to people in a position that desperately need it, and they have volunteers that visit people's houses to provide that care. And the traditional process for them, acknowledging how important it is to know who they're sending into people's houses, they did ID checks. The process was that the individuals come into their offices and submit their ID, and people cite it. So they came to us and said, look, we need an alternative method. We need a digital way of substituting this. And we delivered it to them, and they were very happy with the results. But then as COVID, I guess, became heightened, they realized that the amount of volunteers they needed to go out to people's houses was increasing enormously, because not only did they need to deliver the home services to the people that needed it, they were also now dealing with the fact that a lot of those people that would otherwise be accessing those services in a hospital or in a GP's surgery can no longer get there because they're locked down. So they needed to ramp up their levels of recruitment for volunteers to deliver the services. So that then puts your normal pressures that every recruiter watching this will know about, the normal pressures on any project: time, volume of candidates, how do we get to these people, and how do we push them through a recruitment process as quickly as possible. And thankfully, using RapidID's technology through Xref, they were able to automate that ID checking piece quicker than they would otherwise do it, because they don't need anyone to come into their office. They can approve somebody's ID in seconds. And it was just one less thing they needed to worry about, was people's ID and how are they going to get to IDing all of those people. They still had the challenge of hiring all those volunteers, but it's helped them to deliver as many home visits as they can with people that they trust. And so that was a nice feel-good story to be able to do our little bit, I guess, when it's needed.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that, guys. Look, if you're watching this, I think the big message out the back of this is don't run off and go hunting for an ID solution. Just do one thing and figure out how you're checking IDs on your candidates today, and then figure out if you have a problem or not, and whether you think you're doing it the right way. Now, if you want to have a peek over the fence and see what other industries are doing and how ID checking is serving other parts of the planet, hunt Dave and Ash down and have a chat with these guys. I know how busy these guys are at the moment, so I'm just going to say thanks for spending the time with us. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, I think very big things to come in this space as we get back to a little bit of normality. But thanks for spending the time.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for having us.